Welcome to the Métis Nation of Alberta's presentation on Indigenous Protected and Conserved Areas, or IPCAs. This presentation will provide some background information on IPCAs and some context as to why the MNA wants your input. In 2010, the UN developed a plan to protect and conserve areas of biodiversity across the world. Canada adopted this plan by setting its own biodiversity goals and targets in 2015, covering issues like protecting species at risk, implementing sustainable forestry, and connecting Canadians to nature. Target 1 specifically aims to expand the lands and waters conserved in Canada to at least 17% by the end of 2020. Only 12.1% of Canada's land and freshwater was conserved as of December 2019. Canada created an initiative called Pathway to Canada Target 1, which focuses on expanding the protected lands and waters through a network of parks and other area-based conservation measures. Indigenous protected and conserved areas are being established across the country to help meet Canada's international commitments for the protection of biodiversity. The MNA has secured funding for a 3-year project aimed at building capacity towards the establishment of an IPCA, which is what we're here to talk to you about today. If you'd like more information about the Pathway to Target 1 initiative, you can visit the website conservation2020canada.ca. The MNA received funding in 2019 and began some initial research into what IPCAs are. This year, 2020, we entered the planning stage, where we've been diving deeper into research on existing IPCAs and the foundations others have used to create them. We decided to hold engagement sessions with MNA citizens, like this one, to help inform our next steps. Next year, we will begin the evaluation stage, where we can take the information gathered from our research and from engagements to evaluate some potential sites for an IPCA. We'll also be exploring potential partnerships for the establishment and management of an IPCA. The final stage will be implementation. This will be when the MNA selects and secures a site for an IPCA, builds a management plan, and then formally declares it to be an IPCA. It's difficult to know exactly when the implementation stage will occur, as it will depend on opportunities for funding and capacity available in the future. We are currently in the second year of our 3-year funding agreement. In order to frame today's discussion, the next couple of slides will cover some key terms that will help in the understanding of what an IPCA is, especially with regards to Canada's conservation goals. Biodiversity, the variety of life in the world or in a particular habitat or ecosystem. Capacity, having both the knowledge and the skills to be empowered to act. Having capacity means having access to the appropriate tools on an ongoing basis until individual communities or nations are empowered. This can include the provision of long-term support and/or funding. Conservation, the preservation or efficient use of resources. In terms of the biological world, conservation is the management of Earth's biodiversity with the aim of protecting species, their habitats, and ecosystems from extinction. Conservation economy, the pursuit of social and economic benefits through the conservation of ecosystems within an area. Cultural keystone species, iconic species that have helped shape the traditions, beliefs, and knowledge systems of Indigenous people over time. Governance, the authority or use of power to make decisions and be accountable for them. Governance differs from management in terms of who holds the authority and who is ultimately accountable. Protected area, a clearly defined geographic area that is recognized, dedicated, and managed through legal or other effective means to achieve long-term conservation of nature with associated ecosystem services and cultural values. The term IPCA was coined by an Indigenous circle of experts who sought to define how Indigenous groups and the government could work together towards achieving the Conservation 2020 goal. This group defined an IPCA as lands and waters where Indigenous governments have the primary role in protecting and conserving ecosystems through Indigenous laws, governance, and knowledge systems, with culture and language forming a vital component of an IPCA. While IPCAs vary in terms of governance, management structure, and objectives, they generally share three essential elements. They are Indigenous-led, in that Indigenous governments have the primary role in determining the objectives, boundaries, management plans, and governance structure for IPCAs as part of their exercise for self-determination. They represent a long-term commitment to conservation, and they elevate Indigenous rights and responsibilities. IPCAs are intended to conserve biodiversity through the protection of lands and waters. Some of the challenges Canada aims to address through the creation of IPCAs are protecting enough habitat to support viable populations of all species, protecting the right areas to ensure species are protected and conserved across entire landscapes rather than isolated areas of protection, and protecting natural areas which span across jurisdictional boundaries, which requires a cooperative approach. To address those key challenges, IPCAs can focus on a variety of ecological elements of the lands and waters they aim to protect. IPCAs can be designed specifically to protect important fish and wildlife species, such as keystone species or species at risk. Protection offered by an IPCA can focus on important habitat for one or more species, such as breeding grounds or feeding areas. IPCAs can also focus on areas rich in species diversity to ensure the most species will benefit from the protection. As some species move long distances across landscapes, it might also be important for IPCAs to protect the links between existing protected areas, such as wildlife travel corridors, or lands and waters between existing provincial or federal parks. Additionally, while IPCAs are designed to protect and support ecological conservation, that does not limit them from being utilized by both the Indigenous community and the larger population for land use activities. Within an IPCA, areas can be designated to achieve ecological conservation goals while allowing low-impact activities to occur elsewhere. For example, an IPCA could have areas of restricted use to protect fish and wildlife, and areas where hunting and gathering and light development such as selective logging are allowed. Furthermore, an IPCA can have economic benefits to the community, including providing food and resources, a place to learn and develop traditional skills, and even tourist opportunities that promote the respectful and non-destructive use of an area. In addition to ecological conservation, an IPCA is an opportunity for Indigenous communities to reconnect with the land and heal both it and the people, providing a place for the promotion and respect of Indigenous knowledge systems, protocols, and ceremony. An IPCA can also support the revitalization of Indigenous language, the conservation of cultural keystone species, and the protection of food security. In essence, a key feature of an IPCA is that they are designed to benefit Indigenous communities and promote Indigenous peoples' use of the land and water while achieving conservation and cultural objectives. Within the idea of cultural conservation, an IPCA can be established to offer spaces for cultural regeneration and community healing, providing a place for Indigenous peoples to connect with the land. IPCAs can also be created with the intention of creating cultural immersion programs and providing an opportunity to practice traditional lifestyles. So while conservation and protection are also occurring, the IPCA can provide a space for cultural and traditional practices to be likewise conserved and protected. Finally, when selecting an IPCA location, both cultural and traditional features, importance, and significance should be considered alongside the biodiversity and conservation value of the land and ecosystem itself. Additionally, an IPCA does not need to be located on an undisturbed or ecologically intact landscape. Rather, if an area is of important cultural significance, a restoration area could be selected as an IPCA, in which the Indigenous community manages the area with the purpose of restoring the natural ecosystem and protecting it from further damages. Although one of the core tenets of an IPCA is that it be Indigenous-led with Indigenous governance, that does not mean that the Indigenous community must manage and govern the IPCA alone. There are several partnership-based governance and management approaches that can assist an Indigenous community in the managing of an IPCA, including Indigenous Government-Crown Government partnerships. In this model, the Indigenous community works with the Crown government, such as the Canadian Federal Parks or Provincial Park Program, to recognize, establish, and manage a park. A possible example for the M&A could be partnering with the Government of Alberta and Alberta Environment and Parks with regards to the provincial parks that are set to be removed from the parks listing and become available for partnership opportunities, including, for example, River Lot 56, located in the city of St. Albert. A second partnership model is Indigenous government and non-government partnerships. In this model, an Indigenous community works with a non-government partner such as industry, land trusts, or conservation organizations. An example for the M&A could be to partner with a land trust in Alberta or a biosphere reserve to expand an existing area or establish a new area and share responsibilities of management and conservation. One potential partnership could be the Beaver Hills Biosphere, located east of Edmonton and south of Elk Island National Park, which is actively seeking to build partnerships with Indigenous communities. A third model is a hybrid partnership. In this model, multiple parties, both government and non-government, work collaboratively to manage the protected or conserved area. This could be the M&A working in partnership with a government agency such as Parks Canada and a non-government group like Ducks Unlimited. The final model would be sole Indigenous governance, in which the Indigenous community and its government makes unilateral decisions and manages the land it controls for protection or conservation purposes. An example for the M&A would be to acquire new land or take land it already owns and make that land or a portion of that land an IPCA, which would be solely managed by the M&A. The next series of slides will go over a couple different existing IPCAs to help provide some context as to what an IPCA is. Our first example is the Thaidene Nene National Park Reserve and Territorial Protected Area, which is in the Northwest Territories along the northeastern arm of Great Slave Lake and encompasses an area of 33,000 square kilometers. This area is part of the traditional territory of the Lutzelk'e Dene First Nation, and the park was established through partnership between the nation and both the territorial government and the federal government through Parks Canada, making it an example of a government-to-government partnership. The reserve was funded through a combination of public funds and private donations to a trust fund that has been established to support the Indigenous nation in the management and operations of the reserve, as well as supporting the education and training of community members to work in the park, to promote the Dene way of life, and foster a tourism economy. In this example, we can see an example of successful government partnership, but also ways an IPCA can be utilized to support a community, promote traditional practices, and provide economic benefits. Our next example is the Kessay Tribal Park from Doig River First Nation. This is a tribal park located in northeastern BC and northwestern Alberta, and was established to protect the cultural and ecological values of the community's traditional area from industrial developments. The BC government recognizes the portion of the tribal park located within the BC boundaries, whereas the Alberta portion of the tribal park is located on public Crown land and has yet to be recognized by the Alberta government. So this is another example of a government-to-government partnership model, but also provides an example of the struggles IPCAs can face with recognition. Doig River First Nation has an interest in co-management models for the tribal park and is open to tourism in the area, but has a priority to protect key cultural and ecological values of the boreal forest while ensuring the land use is compatible with their traditional land use. Our final example is the Broadback Watershed Conservation Area, which was established by a community of 10 Cree nations and the Nature Conservancy of Canada, creating an area along Broadback River in northern Quebec that has been designated as a park and biodiversity reserve. This is an example of an Indigenous government and non-government partnership approach, with the recognition of the park by the Quebec provincial government, but the government is not involved in the management or use of the park. The Cree Nation government, with advice from community members, determined which areas to include in the park, which includes the protection of an old trading post, rock paintings, and trap lines. This park is protected from development but still allows for traditional use of the area, and it's recognized as a biodiversity reserve. This example provides an idea of what a partnership could be with a non-government agency, such as a biosphere reserve, and also discusses some potential uses for an IPCA. Now that you've seen some examples of what other Indigenous communities have done, I'd like for you to think about what Métis citizens in Alberta would like to see. What should be protected and conserved? What should an M&A IPCA provide to the environment and to the Métis community? We are looking forward to hearing your thoughts. Some final things to remember and keep in mind for the discussion. An IPCA is Indigenous-led and it should elevate Indigenous rights and responsibilities. An IPCA represents a long-term commitment to conservation and should promote conservation and protection of biodiversity, and as part of Canada's pathway to Target 1, should be part of an interconnected land use plan. An IPCA can protect and promote cultural and traditional practices, providing an opportunity to practice, share, and learn traditional teachings. And finally, an IPCA, while being Indigenous-led, can have different governance and management approaches, including partnerships with Crown governments and non-government agencies.